The Tudor period was rather brutal, with its new and inventive ways to torture an individual or to punish them. New laws were even created by the king, Henry VIII, to punish or execute a person for specific crimes. And interestingly, most crimes had a set punishment. Heretics, for example, were burnt at the stake, and thanks to a chap called Richard Roose, those who were caught having poisoned their masters were boiled to death, a punishment Henry VIII came up with himself. But in history, there have been questions as to whether the punishment and the elevation of crime status was in fact a ploy by Henry VIII. Maybe it was a cover-up for the actions of the king. That is for you to decide, as it can now not be proven, only speculated, based on logical thinking and reasoning. Now, the first account of boiling alive in England was Richard Roose. He was the cook for Bishop John Fisher, and according to Roose, he was just aiming to place laxatives in the pottage he cooked to give all of the other servants, with the aim of giving them a difficult time with toileting. He felt this was just in jest. Maybe Roose only thought it was a laxative, but in fact it was poison placed into the pottage and multiple people died. But thankfully for Fisher, Fisher did not touch his food that day. Now, the story goes into two different directions. The first is that Henry VIII was so scared of being poisoned himself that he used this as an excuse to try and teach other potential poisoners a lesson. The second is that Henry VIII was trying to defend his wife's honour. That's Anne Boleyn at the time, by the way. The same wife he had executed just 2 short years later. Anne and her family were being blamed for being responsible for setting Richard Roose up for the task of killing Fisher. Fisher did not like Anne, and he was openly against her marriage to the king and was quite vocal about it. Now, Henry then told Parliament to introduce a bill which stated that anyone found guilty of poisoning or attempting to poison their master or mistress should be attainted for high treason and then executed. This also meant that, as it was high treason, treason against the country, the king or the government, that there was no need for a prior judicial process or a jury to determine the defendant's guilt. Henry was quite clever like that. This way, there was no questions asked. Parliament obeyed, and Richard Roose was found guilty of high treason, and his punishment was being boiled alive. Now, at the time, this sort of punishment was unheard of, and Henry, it's believed, was making a point so that no one crossed the law again. But it also meant that Henry could now use this punishment to get rid of anyone he felt to be a threat, without needing a due process under common law. Now, Richard Roose died in 1532, but 10 years later, in 1542, a second individual tried the act of poisoning. This was a lady by the name of Margaret Davy, and she worked in a house where she then poisoned 3 women. To kill a man by poison is the most detestable of all, because it is the most horrible and fearful to the nature of man, and of all others can be least prevented, either by manhood or providence. This offence was so odious that by an act of Parliament it was made high treason, and it inflicted a more grievous and lingering death than the common law prescribed, that the offender shall be boiled to death in hot water, upon which statute Margaret Davy, a young woman, was attainted of high treason for poisoning her mistress and some others, was boiled to death in Smithfield, the 17th of March in the same year. You see, with this, it tells us that the last documented execution by boiling alive was of this woman, Margaret Davy. She was, as mentioned, accused of poisoning a woman who employed her and others, and with this was tried. Henry VIII himself was terrified of poisoning, and he even employed a taste tester to try his food. Margaret Davy was a maidservant who was accused of poisoning 3 people in the house where she lived. She was, on the day of her execution, taken to Smithfield, the same place where Richard Roose had been executed years before, and was boiled alive in a huge pot in front of the crowd. Now, the act of boiling alive itself is horrific and barbaric and brutal and gruesome and grisly. In Richard Roose's case, he was attached to a series of ropes and pulleys and then dipped in and out of the boiling water 3 times. It's reported there was a lot of yelling up until the moment he died, as you would probably imagine. Now, the gory part. What actually happens to a person when they get boiled alive? You see, recent accidents that involve people falling into hot springs can tell us a lot more, because the effect on a person is essentially the same. It's believed that the pain undoubtedly will be so horrific, so full-on and immense. It won't, however, be enough to make you unconscious unless your head is actually submerged. And if your head goes under, then your brain will cook. It's believed that Richard Roose must have been fully submerged because, as I've said, it only took 3 ducks and then he ceased to cry and yell. But when boiled alive, it is literally that. You are being cooked from the inside out. Organs such as your skin, your liver, your heart, and all the rest of you will rise in temperature. And as that happens, you cook. You may not initially look to be badly hurt or damaged, but inside, you would be dead. Dead and cooked. The worst part is that until you succumb or your head is submerged, you will be fully conscious and feel all the pain until your nerve endings are destroyed. It is even thought that a person would experience this and be able to smell the cooking flesh of their own body before they then either pass out and die, or quite simply just die from the agony that they are in. The severity and the punishment and the injury was really quite severe for the time. And by the time they are dead, their skin would be peeling and quite leathery. Henry VIII really did come up with some truly horrific and barbaric methods of execution and torture. Thank you for watching, and to support, please remember to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.